My name is Enrique Cardona, and I'm about to review the last movie of Daniel Craig's James Bond. And even though this is the end for him, right now, there's no time to die. I know, it's the worst pun I ever done. I'm not James Bond. Now before we get into this review, let me talk about my history with James Bond. I grew up with the Pierce Brosnan movies, only on TV and DVD because I didn't saw the movies when they were in theaters. I was still a kid. But in 2005, when Daniel Craig was introduced as the new James Bond, I went to see it, and basically James Bond is my first theater James Bond movie I ever seen. I basically watched his movies from beginning to end, and now this probably feels like the perfect conclusion to his franchise, at least from Daniel Craig's perspective, because this is the last movie he will ever do. He has made clear that he will never do another James Bond movie, as he wants other people to take over the character. It's sad to see him go, but at least he got a better, proper goodbye than other Bonds in the past. So it's good to see him saying goodbye to the character that defined his career. It's also important to mention that this is the 25th movie of the James Bond franchise, so we don't know what's gonna happen in the future, but I'm excited to see other movies. But now, let's get into this movie first. James Bond now lives in retirement with Madeleine Swan in other countries. But then Spectre attacks him and realizes, or at least he thinks, that Madeleine betrayed him. So they get separated. 5 years later, a new organization is planning to, do the Thanos logic, get rid of one half of the population in order to the other one to survive. And they're using an experimental virus called Heracles in order to do so. And the villain of this movie has a connection not only to James Bond, but to Spectre and Madeleine as well. So it's up to James Bond to not only stop this abomination of a virus, but also realize what he's been missing and the things that he has to do in order to save the world. Now, all the remaining characters from the beginning of the franchise to the end, at least from the Daniel Craig timeline, is basically the same. Tanner, played by Rory Kinnear, even though he doesn't do much, it's good to see that he's still supporting the MI6 agents. It's good to see Ralph Fiennes as M. He's still feeling like the authority here, but I will admit that Judi Dench is a better M than Ralph Fiennes. Nothing against him, it's just that Judi Dench just is more firm and more stern. But it still does a good M. Even though Naomi Harris doesn't do much as Moneypenny, it's good that she has a friendship with Bond other than just being another Bond girl. And it's good to see that she helps on a daily basis, even though she doesn't fire a gun. Ben Whishaw comes back as Q, giving all the proper equipment and gadgets to James in order to survive the next mission, so it's good to see him, even though he's annoyed by him. It's good to see Felix Leiter, played by Jeffrey Wright, as well in this movie. He has more of a stake in this plot and more of a connection with James as well, and it's good to see that they were more like brothers instead of just, guys that know each other like spies. So this is a good thing that he comes back as well in this movie. You also see Ana de Armas as Paloma, in which she's hot as well as kicking ass, so I cannot complain about that. Another new character that we see in this movie is Nomi, who's playing the new 007. I will admit I don't know why they gave her the new 00, but given the fact that there are other agents in the MI6 agency, it's also good to see that there are others who can be the new 007. Even though from the beginning James doesn't get along with Nomi as well as being the new 007, it's good to see that they still have a friendship between them, and there is also good to see that Daniel Craig, in the character of James Bond, is passing the torch of 007 to this new agent, even though I don't think we're going to see her in new movies. I doubt that. It's also good to see that the character is seeing that she can be also the new 007. So that's a nice thing to see. Other characters that we see returning to the franchise is Madeline Swan, played by Leah Seydoux. I hope I pronounced that name well because I don't speak French, but whatever. I will admit, Madeline Swan in the movies of Spectre and this one, I never gravitated with why she's the new Bond girl or why she loves James Bond, because every time that we see a new Bond girl is either just for sex or just for kiss or just a one-note character. Actually, that's not fair. In the Daniel Craig movies, we see that there is more development to the characters, like Vesper, like Moneypenny, and Leah as Madeline is no exception. It's just that when the last movie, Spectre, showed her that she loves James Bond, even though they met for, I don't know, a few hours or days, I don't know, it just feels weird that she is now the new girlfriend of James Bond, probably even a wife. But it's good to see that Madeline has more of a stake in the plot of the movie than in the last one. At least she has more of a personal stake in this one, as we see that her past is hunting her down. So it's now up to her to realize what she must do in order to survive the new villain. And with that said, let's talk about the new villain of the movie, and that is Raffi, played by Rami Malek. Safin is the leader of an organization, but not associated with Spectre. In fact, he's actually going against Spectre, going out of his way to not only murder people he feels that they don't need to be in this world, but also members of Spectre, because something that happened in the past that has a connection with Madeline. You can guess what it is, but for the sake of not spoiling anything, I'm just gonna say that he's out for blood. So he's not only going after Spectre, but half of the population. And even though Rami Malek is not exactly a good villain in this movie, I still feel that his performance is strong enough and at least relatable enough in order to see why he's doing this. I will admit, when they first announced that he was playing the villain, I thought he was playing Dr. No. After all, Christoph Waltz plays Aristotle Blofeld in this movie, but I will also assume that, given that this is kind of like a reboot or remake, I can't remember, I thought that Rami Malek is playing Dr. No. In fact, there's a lot of things that make me think that this guy is playing Dr. No, even though from the outfits, the layout, and the fact that he's kind of looking like Dr. No. But I will admit that this is just a personal preference for me, at least because I like Sean Connery's Dr. No movie. But that's the case. He still plays a good enough villain in this movie. Not the best, but it's hard to top Javier Bardem. So good luck to the next Bond villain, because he was just delightful and very, very hammy. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about the character at the center of this movie. And that is, of course, James Bond, played by Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig as James Bond has gone through a major character development, something that we haven't seen in other Bond movies. Not even the ones that I actually like GoldenEye and The World's Not Enough. But Daniel Craig in this franchise, as well as in this movie, goes through a major character development. In the first time that we see him, he's more cold and stoic. He actually cares more about the mission and he doesn't let his ego get in the way. But we also see that he has an emotional development, and we see him throughout the entire franchise. We see him change from being less stoic and stone cold and more humble and more emotional than the other Bond characters. And it's also good to see that Daniel Craig in this movie does have more range of emotions. I will admit that Daniel Craig showing emotions in this movie is weird for me, because I'm always getting used to the character being just stone cold and focused. But in this one, he shows more emotion, more dramatization and more sentimental moments. And it's also good to see that the final performance of Daniel Craig shows it, because he knows that this is probably going to be the last performance he'll ever do as James Bond. And in this movie, we see the character going through a major character change, from the people he meets to the villains he fights. Now, I'm not going to say what happens next, and I'm not going to say what was the connection between him and Madeline Swan other than just being boyfriend and girlfriend. But I will say this, It puts Bond in a position that he actually has more of a stake in this movie, and he sees now that the world depends on him more than ever. And he knows what he has to sacrifice for in order to achieve that goal, even his own happiness. And it's good to see that Daniel Craig in this movie is showing the stake of this movie. The stakes are higher, and he shows that throughout his performance. So it's also good to see. Now the movie is not directed by Sam Mendes this time. The movie is directed by Kari Fukunaga. I hope I pronounced that name well. But either way, he brings a new layout to the movie, a new style, even though paying tribute to the previous Bond movies, but also paying tribute as well as open the door for new possibilities and being his own movie as well. And the direction as well as the cinematography in this movie feels top notch. It still feels good as the other previous ones. The layout of the villains are good. The production design and the action sequences are still top notch. I would say that it's actually more better than in the previous ones. And it's not saying a lot since my favorite movie is Skyfall. Now, normally I don't talk about the music in my show as well as in my episodes, but I will say this movie and the theme of the entire Bond movie feels more sad and emotional than the other ones. Skyfall, it was all action-packed, and Spectre was a little slow at times and a little more lovey-lovey, but in this one feels more painful and more emotional. Billie Eilish does the new song of No Time to Die, and the performance and the music feels like this is the end. Like, it feels like a finale to things, and the entire movie feels like it. It feels like the music is carrying this finale, and it's so hard to see, and it's basically very emotional music. So now I'm going to go to the spoiler section. So if you haven't seen No Time to Die yet, I suggest you stop the video here and actually check it out. So do that and then come back to the video. We find out in this movie that Madeline has a daughter called Matilde, and yes, she's trans. I'm trying it. We find out in this movie that Madeline, after 5 years, she has a daughter named Matilde. And yes, people, she's the daughter of James Bond. The movie tries to trick you into say she may not be James Bond's daughter, but come on, she's her daughter. The blue eyes gave it away. I don't know why the movie was trying to trick us that wasn't it. But either way, she has more of a stake in this plot, and the bad guys kidnap her. And Felix in this movie dies at the end by being betrayed by one of his agents. And we see that James Bond not only defeats the bad guy and saves his daughter as well as Madeline, but he has to sacrifice himself. As not only does Sapine infect him with the virus of Heracles, but also he's been mortally wounded. So the movie is implying here that James Bond is dead, as well as showing us how he's sacrificing himself. It's sad to see him go, and it's sad to see that Madeline is not going to have a normal life with James Bond, because let's face it, as an agent of the MI6, who has a normal life? Now this movie might not be the last James Bond movie, and probably not my best James Bond that I will ever say. I still consider Skyfall being my favorite because it came out on my birthday and it was much good and it was so surreal for me. But I will admit, No Time to Die feels like my second favorite movie of Daniel Craig's James Bond movies. I feel like this one has more of a stake here, and the action and the performances all reflect that. The characters go through a major character development, and it's also good to see that James Bond has a major shift in his character. And it's also good to see that Daniel Craig's last movie as James Bond did not feel like a lazy movie. It felt more like an emotional goodbye. And as such, I had to do this. So I have this. I might not have a vodka martini, but it's good enough. This is probably the best symbolic way so I can say goodbye to Daniel Craig as James Bond. So it's the best thing I could come up with. But let's say a toast to Daniel Craig and his entire Bond franchise. I'm gonna miss him. 2005 was the year that I got to know Daniel Craig as James Bond, and I'm happy to say that this is the moment that defined his career. He might have other movies that he might excel at, but James Bond will always be my first. And I have to say, I'm gonna miss him. Now, as far as the new Bond is concerned, we don't know who will be. We don't know who's going to play. People say that it should be a woman, but it should not be. James Bond is not a character that you can change gender or sexuality, because the character is definable not by his gender but by his character. And in all honesty, just keep it as a man. Like Daniel Craig says, don't suck. That's all I can say. But it's also not fair to me to say that whoever is going to play the James Bond character will suck, because there have been so many James Bond and they all perform admirably. And I know there will not be a bad actor in this movie. At least I hope so. So whoever plays the new James Bond in this movie or in this entire franchise, I wish you luck. That's all I can do. And hopefully the future will be bright for the character and for MI6 best agent as well. So for Daniel Craig and to the future. I've been Enrique, and I'll see you next time.